And when we do suffer sin, how those psalms of lament are meant for us. You see this in Psalm 3, Psalm 13. There's many, many psalms, both individual and corporate, that are lament psalms. And in fact, it's one of the things about that helps us understand. You probably covered a couple chapters ago with Tamar and what happened to her, and what is it that we as Christians, how do you speak to Tamar if you meet someone like that? Mm-hmm. And the Psalms of Lament are those psalms meant for those deep times of pain and sorrow. So
yeah, absolutely. And well, I hope we actually have a chance to maybe look at Psalm 3, but it'd be very easy to spend the whole time just talking about that one. But that is a good point that you were just making about the deep sorrow. I think that reminds us about chapter 14, how Joab saw that even though David was obviously grieving the death of Amnon, and you can tell, like, hey, my son Absolom has done something terrible, and he shouldn't be able to just walk back into Jerusalem like nothing happened, right? So there's a thing about justice, but in the previous chapter, Joab could tell that he didn't want to disown his son. He didn't want his son to be destroyed, and you see that elsewhere too. So I think that kind of the deep pain you were speaking of, that plays into what we see in chapter 15. Anything else briefly in terms of context or things that kind of tie into this to keep in mind before we read the chapter through?
As far as when we look at this, we remember who Absolom is, which you've been dealing with him as that third son, and but his name itself, which is kind of ironic, because it has the understanding of Father's peace, or the peace of the Father, and that's anything but in this coming chapter that we're having, that's coming up. Yeah. And I think also, with keeping that in mind, some of the other things we're going to want to watch out for is some of the other players that are in this, such as Saul, who ends up being, some had said, Bersheba's grandfather, and how that plays out. But also, I think we don't want to miss where these things take place, such as Hebron, Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives, and how that can guide us in our understanding, or bring out more meaning or understanding of what's happening here in the 15th chapter.
Yeah, that's a good point. All these places, right? They're places. They're not the first time that we've heard about these places, and it certainly won't be the last. But let's go ahead then, and we'll just put the chapter down before us here. We got chapter 15 in 2 Samuel in the English Standard Version. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go and pay my vow that I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived at Geshur in Aram, saying, 'If the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord.'" The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, 'Absalom is king at Hebron.'" With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city Gilo. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly. lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever the Lord the king decides. So the king went out, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out, and all the people after him. And they halted at the last house. And all his servants passed by him, and all the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, Why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go I know not where? Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will be your servant. And David said to Ittai, Go then, pass on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him, and all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by. And the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on toward the wilderness. And Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with all the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am, and let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, Are you not a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your 2 sons, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. And it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absolom. And David said, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. While David was coming to the summit, where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him, with his coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, If you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant, then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz Zadok's son, and Jonathan Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So, again, right, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of these minor characters, and, I think it's really interesting, the combination, I think, you see in David of both showing personal concern, right? I mean, there's he's talking to Ittai, right, who's not from there. He's thinking to himself, is this path, this journey really going to be any good for him? Telling him to stay back, just out of concern. And then, when he's talking here to, it's Hushai, right? He's saying, hey, why don't you go and be a mole, right, on the inside? So, a combination of prudence and also compassion, right?
Yeah, we can see that. We can see that in the palace intrigue, as they would say.
Yeah.
And we can certainly see David playing both parts, one to a foreigner and one to who's part of the people, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's a very mixed bunch, right? And I think we actually referenced this chapter earlier when we were looking. I just kind of the nature of that, right? Where is it? It was back. There you go, in verse 18, right? And all his servants passed by him, all the Kerethites, all the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites. So, I mean, it is just interesting. It's one of the little details that just shows you how eclectic a bunch, right, David kept around him, and how previously, I mean, it really spoke to David's kind of overwhelming popularity, popular among not only the 12 tribes of Israel, but, I mean, the surrounding nations, right, in different ways. But yeah, I mean, you just see it in the first chapter, right? This is the big thing. Absalom, just right under David's nose, undermines his authority and rule and steals the people's hearts, right? I mean, he just wins over the people in this popularity contest that he starts.
I think that if we look at that, and especially the ones that leave, is throughout David, you find enemies becoming friends, friends becoming enemies. Mm-hmm. We find what's interesting is that when he does leave, he's leaving with foreigners and not with those who are in the house of God. And the ones who are part of the house are the ones that are now causing and usurping and going against the authorities that God has given. And we'll see that in the New Testament too, and throughout the New Testament. Ones that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, where throughout the New Testament we see the foreigners, and I think you even mentioned this yesterday or the day before, about the foreign woman who comes and is included, right, even among the scraps. That's right. But the people who belong, such as the Pharisees and that, are the ones who rebelled, which is a sad state.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Going back to Absalom, and probably the important part that I can see here in that first part is we see the fourth commandment in Absalom breaking that fourth commandment in several ways. One as his father, and one as his king. That who has given that authority, and that's been God who's given authority both to the father and to the king. And so we see Absalom not just trying to usurp authority against David, his father king, but in actuality acting against God.
And it's really interesting too, because I think that point you're just making is really highlighted in the text. Because we have such a contrast, right? You have, here's Absalom, right, who's killed a man, and he gets welcomed back, right? I mean, just think about that. Moses runs away, because he's killed somebody, and he thinks he can't come back. But here, look, Absalom gets to come back, and the king kisses him, right? Again, that peace, right? I mean, that is his name, right? The Father's peace. So he has his Father's peace extended to him mercifully in forgiveness, right? But then how does he repay him? Next thing he's doing is he's getting chariots and horses and starts doing this. And it's not like he does it the next day. The Hebrew construction there that gets translated in the ESV as after this. We've seen it before. It means kind of like some time after this. But I think it's just to make the point you were just articulating, that by kind of skipping ahead to this now, it just shows wow. So this is how Absalom is going to repay his father?
Yeah, and to be fair, probably in one sense is that you have Absalom as repaying his father, but he's seen the misbehavior of his father throughout this whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's not like what we pass on to our children is very important. Yeah. Is it the Swedes, one of them, that says be careful, or how's it, children are like cement. If you drop something on them, it would leave an impression. So it makes you wonder how much of an impression has been left on Absalom. Yeah. Besides his own character in this whole thing.
Yes.
But he does repay, and I think it was about 2 years, and then we'll see that it was another 4 years. So this whole 6 years of this going on, some of these things taking place. If I remember right, that's the way that works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. No, it's not as if you've got innocent David and just bad apple Absalom or something like that. We talked about that, of course. I mean, really, the last two chapters just about how everything that's going on here it traces its way back to David in many ways. The bad example that he set, the sword that he brought upon his own house. Let's talk a little bit about so what he's actually doing here. Because you're right, he's usurping. He's not just ungratefully paying back his father's kindness with evil. Yeah, that's certainly part of it. But also in that sense of the fourth commandment too. I mean, he really is undermining his authority, right, and stepping in to his shoes where he shouldn't be. And then I don't recall. Did you mention the eighth commandment also? I mean, he's also just lying, right? And just kind of slandering him here, right? Because so you got this, right? We got to remind ourselves, if he's there sitting in the gate, right? This is where people go to settle disputes, right? And so this is so tricky because he just says, "Hang on a second, what city are you from?" And so this is like, this is just like when someone comes up to you with like a clipboard and like an official looking garb, right? And starts asking you a question like that. You're like, and so they're like, well, I'm from the tribes of Issachar. He's like, oh, Issachar, yeah, well, and he gives them the update, right? Too bad David actually, doesn't really have anything for you here, but I can step in. I mean, it's just so underhanded, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at the whole thing, and I think that's right. We have Absalom, which you had talked about in the earlier chapter. He's a very handsome fellow. There's no blemish on him from head to toe. He apparently has long hair. Mm-hmm. And he stands there, and the way it speaks about him standing there, he knows that many kings sit at the gate to take judgment. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things you can read throughout. And he's there to hear the case, but he also appeals, you notice in 3, see, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you. And the plot thickens there because he already takes sides with him.
Yep.
He automatically says, hey, you know what you have to say. And he forgets the whole Proverb 18:17. The first man to speak seems right. Mm-hmm. And because he's not concerned about justice. He's not concerned about making judgment. He is concerned about power, if you will, as you had said, and undermining what the Lord has given and undermining his father. Yep. And then when we do see that, it does go on. Well, I would give you justice, and he does. We talked about the kiss before with David kissing him. He's now greeting them with a kiss as one who is either a brother or have peace with them.
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating, right? Like in verse 5. I mean, this I think kind of helps break down what this kiss means, right? We saw this last time a little bit, and we briefly made the comparison to the Lord and the disciples. But I mean, I think we gotta look at what exactly this kiss entails. We gotta take our break though, but we'll get back to this when we just after a little pause here, everybody. We're looking at 2 Samuel 15 on Thy Strong Word. We'll be right back.
Years of proclaiming the good news of the Good Shepherd.
So 90 seconds here. So what is David doing? Well, Absalom is building this rebellion. Shouldn't he realize that there aren't as many people coming to him? Or does he think he successfully delegated it to Absalom? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, what to think about that? I mean, it is something, right? I mean, it says there in verse 7 that this is going on for 4 years, right? Yeah, I get your question, because it's sort of like after 4 years, is it like, hey, it's funny, people just haven't really had any disputes the last 4 years. Good times, I guess. Yeah, it's a good question. Should we read anything into the fact that Ahithophel may be Bathsheba's grandfather? Yeah, so that was mentioned later. Yeah, I think Pastor Theme maybe made a remark about that too. Well, I want to take a look at that. All right, yeah, so good questions on Facebook there. But yeah, this this kiss thing, right? It's it's an interesting construction too.
Sundays at noon on KFUO.
Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. We're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 15 here, the conspiracy of Absolom. Joined today by our guest, Pastor Brian Thiem, pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Columbia, Missouri. If you've got a question for me or Pastor Thiem, give us a call if you're listening live, 1-800-730-2727. Or if you're in St. Louis, 314-821-0850. You can also send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org or hop on the live stream at facebook.com/AJEspinosa. A couple of questions there already. The one that we'll want to take a look at in a minute here is, so what's David doing while Absalom's building this rebellion over, 4 years here, right? Shouldn't he realize that there aren't as many people coming to him? Or does he think he's maybe successfully delegated this to Absalom? That's a great question. I hope we can get to that in just a second. Before we get to some of these good questions here, I want to make sure I thank our underwriters at the Lutheran Heritage Foundation, LHFmissions.org. Thank you guys for supporting Thy Strong Word. All right. So right before the break, we were looking at this kiss thing here, right? Because certainly there is in the New Testament, we read kind of a little bit of this kiss of peace thing that's going on that seems to be, it seems to be the precursor to what is done in actually a lot of European and Latin American societies even to this day, right, where it's like a kiss between equals, going back to that brotherhood, the family of Christ and the household of faith. But here, it seems to be more than that, right? That it seems to be more like I don't know if it would have been quite like this, but like you kind of think about like art and in media depictions, right? Where like there's like the king like holding out his hand and like the supplicant or the servant, right? Kisses his hand or his ring or something like that. I think that this kiss here, and also the one in the previous chapter, maybe has more of that kind of connotation. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts on this in verse 5?
Well, I think verse 5 itself helps us. It says, "And whenever a man came near to pay homage," and that is a bowing down, a prostrating themselves. Before Absalom, well, what did he do? He put his hand out and he took hold of him. So you're bowing down and hoping for judgment in your favor, and I'm going to take hold of you and show you that no, you belong with me, and we belong together, and we'll get through this, and we'll have peace here. Of course, it comes at a cost, because this is actually even though he's kissing peace with him, it is a kiss of betrayal to his father, and in truth, betrayal to those people, because it's a false peace. It's a false promise that comes with it.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating here, right? Like you were saying, he's really just he's perverting justice too. There's probably like a couple different headings that we could put that under in terms of like the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, right? But yeah, he's just saying like, oh yeah, that's right. You're totally in the right there. We got to do something about that. So he's really just kind of, it's kind of like a political bribe basically, right? Because everyone's coming to him And it's just like, hey guys, like if you go to Absolom, like, he's got this big bag of candy and he'll just give you whatever you want, right? And so, I mean, just this kind of process of just doing favors, right? Especially if maybe they had a case, think about that, right? Like if they were in the wrong, right? Or if they had a case that was a long shot, and David being so equitable, might not have given them something in their favor. This is just starting to like get all kinds of people thinking, man, maybe we would be better off with Absolom.
Right, and you can see where that's the reason their hearts were stolen by him.
Yeah.
And we know that's what he's doing. You can see this on a small scale, both the authority and the winning over, etc. In a household. In a household, if the children are the ones running the household instead of the father, the one who has been given the authority, what happens in the household? There's chaos, and there's manipulation. And you can watch that, and you can go to the therapy sessions and hear about those things in a family. Well, this is just on a larger scale. This is a much larger scale, on a nation scale, where there is authority being taken, there's manipulation, the child is ready to run the household and with the rules.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, no, and I think so. This is kind of an interesting thing in the text to get sorted out a little bit, but the idea of so the father is supposed to be managing the household, but here Absalom's just going and just stepping in, right? In verse 5, you have this construction that's like, so it says it's something like and whenever it happened that someone came to pay him homage. And then it like says like what he would do, and what's fascinating about that, right, is it's like, hang on a second, pay homage to whom, right? Because it would kind of be surprising in some ways if we were talking about Absalom, right? So I think that when you look back in verse 2, and you see there's like a little bit of like textual variation, corruption. It seems like it's meant to be a parallel verse, though. So you have, and whenever it was that a man had a dispute to bring before the king for judgment, and then in verse 5, then similarly, whenever someone would come to pay homage to him, again referring to the king. So it's like there's people going to David, and Absalom's just like grabbing him and pulling him aside and be like, no, over here. And that's really, I mean, it's quite the image, right? It's like, here comes this guy who's on his way to bow down to David, and Absalom's literally just like yanking him, right, pulling him aside with this treacherous kiss. I mean, it's oh man, I mean just that idea, like you were just saying, like like there's this one man that's been appointed by God to oversee these things, and Absalom's already, like with some violence, just trying to yank it away from him.
Yeah, and we see Absalom earlier on. What you notice was he would go out early in the morning. He had this big show.
Yeah.
But it also says that Absalom would call out. He would cry out. He would proclaim. So he was yelling after him, and then, oh, this is the king's son, that good-looking guy. Look at him, and he's here. And then that's when they would pull him in.
Yeah.
And he pulls other people in. We see later on where 200 innocent go along. They're getting pulled in, and
yeah, that's right.
Of course, that's how the devil works, though. Pull them in, deceive them.
No,
and you usually don't know that's happening.
That's right. No, I really appreciate that. Let's take a look at that verse too, right? So it was or was it the 200, right? Let me see here.
That's when he's going to. He asked permission. It's in verse
11 there, right?
11.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, no. So this is just fascinating, right? So there he goes, right? He's like asking Dad, if he can go, pay this vow, right? And so his father's like, well, of course, I'm going to let my son, worship God and all piety. But I mean, this is just so devious, right? He goes to Hebron, right? Which is significant because that's where his father was anointed, right? That's where David was anointed to be king over Judah, and so he's going back there, right? And it's just, I mean, such a provocative way, like you were saying too. Like, he takes these men who don't even realize they're party to this, right? And I mean, he's just pulling the rug right out from underneath his father.
And part of that, though, is he's pulling the rug out of his father, although, and this is a plot and a plan, because he's been doing this for 4 years.
Yeah, right.
And so he's doing it for years. He is going to Hebron. Hebron has the patriarchs there. Abraham and Sarah are buried there. Isaac and Rebekah are buried there. Yeah. Jacob and Leah are buried there, right? We have all of them that are buried there. We have, Absolom was also born in Hebron, and it is one of the places that David was anointed. So I think that you can see in some where they'll talk about the word trap. They have words of kindness, and it's a trap. If you remember from, what was that? The bear in Othello. That's what he did, too. You can see in the same character in Othello. Was it Iago? Is that how it's pronounced? I can't remember.
Iago, yeah.
Iago, yeah. Iago was the same way. He absolutely hates Othello.
Yeah.
But he plotted to destroy him. And he does it. He has kind words. He has all this. He's known that. But underneath is it's a facade on the outside, which is what we can see with Absalom himself. Wonderfully looking on the outside, but rotten to the core.
Well,
rotten to the core on this.
And so, okay, so Absalom, just... I guess just to get to the question here. I mean, so Absalom is fooling a lot of people, right? I mean, he's fooling the people who are coming, and he's saying like, oh, well, actually David doesn't really have anything for you today, but I'm here, right? Or he pulls in these 200. I mean, so he's just pulling the wool over people's eyes. Is that what he's been doing for 4 years to his father? I mean, why doesn't David? This is the question on Facebook. Why doesn't David catch on to this, right? I mean, it's so interesting because just in the previous chapter, Joab gets that wise woman from Tekoa, disguises her and all this, and she's going along and doing the song and dance, and after a while, David's like, "Did Joab put you up to this?" I mean, David's smart, I mean, he's not one to get duped. We've just seen kind of cunning and wisdom from him at every turn. What does he think Absalom's doing all this time? Why does he just fall for this?
Well, I think what's Absalom doing? That's a good question. First of all, it's natural that you love your children. That's part of what God has given us. But also David, I think part of the thing with David is you have to remember that ever since Moses, you still didn't do all of the judging. You had those under you that would do it too. There was only certain cases that would actually make it all the way to the king.
Yeah.
Moses wasn't a king, but still. And the same thing with the king. There are only certain ones who make it. Plus, if I remember right, it's been a while, but I think this is about the time that David is very busy building his palace. And it takes about 4 years to build his palace during that. And he may well have been caught up with that at the time. And instead of doing what he should do, hey, let's look at what tapestry should be hanging over here.
Yeah.
And but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? I mean, which it's so ironic, right? So if he's kind of imagined this, David is building this palace and is so preoccupied with his palace, right, that he doesn't realize that he's building the palace for someone else to rule there, right? I mean, and how often do we do that, right? We start counting our chickens before they hatch, right? And
right.
So that's a great irony, I think. And then to your point too about the delegation, right? I mean, that's right. I mean, I think that certainly if David found out that Absalom was the way that he was doing this, right? He was saying, "Oh well, David doesn't have anything for you, but hey, I do," and too bad that I'm not, the one who's making all these decisions, right? I mean, if he had known that, that would have been problematic. But I mean, I think you're right. Just kind of the from the outside looking in, if he just sees like, oh, hey, look at that, Absalom's, taking an interest in governing, right? And he's taken on some of the load here, and playing a more active role in the house of David. I mean, it would have been natural for a father to be proud of him, even, right? Like, oh, look at that, he's supporting the kingdom, and preparing to take over one day, right? I mean, just you got to sympathize with how easy it would have been for David to get suckered into that, even as wise as he was. I mean, like, we all have a soft spot for our kids, right?
Well, and it is natural that we are, like I said, to love our children. That's what God has given it to us, is to love our family, love those around us, love our children. And so that soft spot is there. It's just we can't be like Eli, who overlooked his sons and and the evils they had committed. And sometimes we do that. But
yeah, I think so. We had some questions come in over email that I wanted to see if we could take a look at here. So this is interesting here. So, Pastor, when I read this, I thought about a song, "Cats in the Cradle." The song, the son is neglected by the father and pledges to be like him. When he grows up, he's just like him, and he neglects his father. That there's certainly some irony and and tragic irony in the process of this. So I guess that was kind of the lead up to the question here. So Absalom sought the peace of his father and the matter of his sister. He was saddened at his non-response. Is that why he rebelled? Is this rebellion kind of all going back to ultimately that David would not give Tamar justice? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that I think you kind of got to read it that way at least to an extent, right? That Absalom is. I mean, isn't that fascinating? Like, we actually didn't even really look at this a couple chapters ago, right? But it says that Absalom just kind of bides his time for like 2 years before he takes revenge on Amnon, right? I mean, there is revenge a dish served cold, right? I mean, so, it certainly feels like that way to me, that Absalom's just plotting and taking his time and is not forgetting or letting go of any of this. What do you think?
Well, he's certainly known for being patient and plotting.
Yeah.
And we can see that. But is this the reason? I can't answer that, exactly per se. It can certainly add to it, because he does say, I would give you justice. There's no one to give you justice here. And he may well have felt that way when it came to his father. So those words may have been heartfelt for him. But
yeah. No, that's a good point, right? Like the whole I would give you justice, right? I mean, ooh, wow. How many times did he say that even to his sister, right? And I mentioned it just briefly in passing, right? But we see that Absalom had a daughter whom he named Tamar, right? Like, after his sister, right? I mean, so you look at like little details like that, and it's just sort of like, wow, okay. I mean, clearly Absalom was deeply hurt about this, and it adds up anyway, even if it isn't explicit. But oh man, when he says that, like, oh, oh, that I were judge in the land, right?
Yes. And I think you can see throughout this kind of justice and not justice and that's going on, and which I think when we get towards the end, which I hope we do, and talk about David and Mount of Olives, because I think there's an important parallel and some important things going on that we see connected with the New Testament, and justice being done.
Yeah, let's go ahead, and because we were just looking here at some of these elements here. We talked a little bit about verse 11, the way that he was just kind of sucking people into this here. I think that maybe the last thing that it'll come up again, right? But in verse 12, we see mentioned here that Absalom he's offering sacrifices, and he sends for Ahithophel the Gilonite, right? And this might be significant later, but so I guess maybe because we did kind of briefly touch on some of like the mixed bunch, right, and how David is wisely getting out before everyone in the palace gets slaughtered. He shows like compassion, right? So I mean there's wisdom and compassion in all this here. But yeah, I think we should take a look here at what's going on at the end and some of these particular characters here, right? What do you think is the significance as we're here getting to the end? They go to the Mount of Olives. They do have the Ark of the Covenant go with them initially, but then sends it back. And you've got Zadok and Abiathar, and then this Ahithophel is mentioned, right? So what do you make of these particular names of people and places?
Well, as far as some of the people in the places, or some of the people anyways, in Zadok, and one of the things you notice here with the Ark of the Covenant coming to them is in this chaos, it's like, well, grab the Ark and let's go.
Yeah.
But what you're not going to have is David manipulating. No, we can't manipulate God here. If I should be here, I will be here. If not, then he will not have me come, and I will not be blessed by him. Because he says, carry it back into the city. If I find favor with the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place, his resting place. If he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am, let me do to me what seems good to him. So one of the things we see is not trying to manipulate God and his authority, much like Absalom is trying to manipulate his earthly father. David is not going to try to manipulate his heavenly father. So we see that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's very timely too, right? I mean, David's confronted with injustice, manipulation, right? So does he say like, hey, you know what? I mean, and this whole thing is illegitimate. It's not legitimate. It's not legal that Absalom's doing this and taking these measures, and so I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to take the Ark of the Covenant because it's just not right. But no, he doesn't react that way. He says, if it's God's will, I'll be back. right? I mean,
yeah, and I think that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's where the Psalm 3. I do not rest in the hands of man, but I rest in the hands of the Lord. And because he'll talk about in Psalm 3 being surrounded by those, but it's the Lord is the one who salvation belongs to. That's the blessing that comes from him. And that's hard even in today. I mean, you look at, this great fun week that we're having right now.
That's right.
We're not in the hands of man or woman. We are not in the hands of the people of this world. We're not in the hands of the devil. We are the baptized children of God, and we belong to him and in his hands.
That's right. And
that's gone on for generations and thousands of years. Even when the martyrs who were burned at the stakes, I'm not the hands of Nero. I'm being burned at the stake. We will sing hymns, and we will give that witness there.
Absolutely. So even like you're saying, like just in our own context, right, where I think everybody is just it's very easy for us to look and point at the other side and say, oh, like look what they're doing, and that's illegitimate, that's manipulative, all this, right? But the response of faith is not like, oh, well, we'll fight fire with fire then, right? But saying, you know what, if it's God's will, he will see to it that this injustice is corrected in due time, right? And that shows David does show a lot of grace, which is a helpful example for us here. But what do you make then of some of these? So that's kind of the Ark of the Covenant here. But going up, right. he does though, right? Take certain people along with him, right? So what do you make of the ones he says, hey, you come with me, and the other ones who he says, hey, you stay back?
Well, I think especially what we have is the foreigners coming. The ones that are already in exile are going into exile.
Yeah. And
some of the God's people, along with the foreigners, are going into the wilderness, and they wait for God to bring them back. If that is so, I think there is, certainly you have some of the intrigue of the spy and so on.
Yeah.
But he also prays that the Lord would show him steadfast love and mercy and faithfulness to them if they come or they go. And we again find the foreigners are the ones who remain faithful. But I think that if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind going to talk about David in the Mount of Olives.
Yeah, they're in verse 30, right?
Reason.
Weeping as he went barefoot.
And I think that becomes important for a couple reasons. So you have David who ascends the Mount of Olives. He comes out of the city. He goes down and across the Kidron Valley. He goes up the Mount of Olives with the people. And he goes weeping and barefoot. And he covers his head because that's the sign of shame. There has been a treason against him. And I guess the reason that I want to make sure we get to this is because we bring this up when we talk about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
And the Garden of Gethsemane mean that olive press that's on the Mount of Olives, kind of down more towards the valley. And in particular there, so here you have David escaping. But when you get to Jesus, he's there, and if you've ever been there, you can see the city walls. Mm-hmm. And John tells us that the officers came and others came, and the guards, Judas, etc., and they had their torches and their lanterns. There is no way that Jesus would not have seen, looking up at the city, he would not have seen those torches coming and those lights. It's night. He would have seen them come. And he could have done as his ancestors, human ancestor had done, David, and escaped over the Mount of Olives and left back into the wilderness. But if he did that, that would have left us in this wilderness of this fallen world. Yeah. And I think in particular what we have here is it gives us an understanding that Jesus is a willing sacrifice. When it talks about that, he could escape like David, but he doesn't. He sees them coming, and he waits. And in a way, he's answering what David had said. You know, if the Lord will have me come to that resting place, then it will be. And in this case, though, he calls more than David back. He ends up calling us all back. And I think that's such a beautiful picture when you get to that New Testament, is to understand David and escaping Absolom in that same spot that Jesus does not escape but remains.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and I think that pairs nicely too, just with the stuff we said about the kisses, right, and how kisses are being used for the purposes of betrayal with Judas. And then even the mention of Ahithophel, right, who is related to Bathsheba. So, do you have like a counselor back there in the city who's basically just there holding a grudge, right, which is not too unlike even the high priests who weren't interested in necessarily giving the Lord justice, but just didn't like him, right? So, I think all those things tie together, and you see like a really powerful, as you've been describing, foreshadowing of the Lord and in his betrayal, who's actually innocent, right? Versus here in David and Absolom, and David, although this is still wrong, certainly failing and not without sin. So a lot of good things, brother, that you helped us unpack today. Thank you very much, and God bless you and all yours there in Columbia, Missouri.
Well, and thank you, and peace be with you.
Thank you, brother. Everybody, Pastor Brian Thiem, Trinity, Columbia, Missouri. Going on to the next chapter in 2 Samuel here, everybody. Till then, I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. Peace.
Ministry of the LCMS. Your support is vital for this program to continue. You can make a gift safe, secure, and easily online at KFUO.org. Thank you for listening and support.